In The Young and the Restless, the most dangerous storms are the ones that begin quietly, almost invisibly, building pressure beneath carefully constructed lives until the moment they erupt and leave nothing untouched. And for Jack Abbott, that storm begins not with betrayal in the traditional sense, but with emotional exhaustion so deep that it begins to erode the very foundation of his judgment. What once felt like stability in his marriage now feels like a performance he no longer understands. And every attempt to maintain balance only exposes how fragile that balance has become. The distance between him and Diane is no longer something that can be explained away by stress or misunderstanding, because it has evolved into something far more corrosive, something rooted in suspicion, unspoken resentment, and a lingering fear that the version of Diane he chose to trust may not be the version standing in front of him now. Jack's internal conflict intensifies as he finds himself trapped between loyalty and instinct, between the desire to protect his marriage and the growing realization that protecting it may require ignoring truths he can no longer deny. The more he tries to hold everything together, the more he feels it slipping through his hands. And that helplessness begins to manifest as frustration, then as quiet anger, and finally as emotional detachment that he cannot fully control. It is in this vulnerable state that he gravitates toward Nikki Newman, not out of calculation, but out of a need for clarity in a world that suddenly feels distorted. Nikki becomes a mirror for his doubts, reflecting back to him the questions he has been too afraid to ask himself, and in that reflection, Jack finds a dangerous sense of validation. For Nikki, this connection is equally complicated, because her own attempt to mediate peace with Diane has failed in a way that leaves her unsettled, as if she has unintentionally triggered something far more volatile than she anticipated. Her frustration with Diane is not new, but this time it carries a different weight, because it is entangled with Jack's vulnerability and the fragile state of his marriage. Nikki understands the optics, the history, the inevitable assumptions that will follow if her involvement deepens. Yet she cannot completely disengage, because part of her recognizes the sincerity of Jack's struggle, and part of her is drawn to the emotional intensity of a situation that feels both dangerous and unavoidable. Meanwhile, Diane is not as unaware as Jack hopes she might be, because the subtle shifts in his behavior do not escape her notice. She reads the tension in his silence, the hesitation in his responses, the way his attention seems divided even when he is physically present. And it confirms the fear that has been building inside her long before Nikki's name even enters the equation. For Diane, this is not simply a marital issue, it is a threat to everything she has fought to reclaim. A reminder that her place in this world has always been conditional, always one misstep away from being taken from her. That fear transforms rapidly into something sharper, something more aggressive, as she begins to interpret every action through the lens of betrayal. The idea that Nikki could be involved ignites something deeply personal within Diane, because Nikki represents more than just a rival. She represents a history of judgment, rejection, and power that Diane has never fully been able to escape. This is where the situation shifts from emotional tension to calculated conflict, because Diane does not respond by retreating or seeking reassurance, but by preparing for retaliation. Her approach is methodical, driven by a need to regain control before she loses it entirely. And that need pushes her toward decisions that blur the line between defense and attack. She begins to observe more closely, to listen more carefully, to piece together fragments of information that can be used to reshape the narrative in her favor. As Diane's suspicion grows, so does her willingness to act on it. And this is where the story deepens into a web of manipulation and emotional warfare. She does not confront Jack directly in a way that would expose her vulnerability, but instead chooses a more strategic path, one that allows her to maintain the illusion of control while quietly escalating the situation behind the scenes. Her attention turns toward Nikki, not as a means of resolution, but as a target, someone she believes must be neutralized before the damage becomes irreversible. This decision marks a turning point, because it introduces a level of calculation that transforms the conflict into something far more dangerous than a simple misunderstanding. Nikki, sensing the shift in Diane's energy, begins to feel the weight of consequences she cannot fully predict. As the tension between them intensifies into something that feels inevitable, she is forced to confront her own role in what is happening, to question whether her attempt to help has instead created an opening for destruction. Yet stepping back is no longer a simple option, because the situation has evolved beyond her control, pulling her deeper into a conflict that now carries personal stakes she cannot ignore. The history between her and Diane resurfaces with renewed intensity, turning every interaction into a subtle battle for dominance, where words are less important than implications, and intentions are constantly questioned. At the center of it all, Jack becomes increasingly isolated, as the two women in his life engage in a silent but escalating war that leaves him with no safe ground. His attempts to restore balance only seem to make things worse, as each effort is interpreted differently by Diane and Nikki, reinforcing their respective narratives and deepening the divide. The pressure begins to take a toll on him in ways he did not anticipate, forcing him to confront the possibility that his need for understanding may have inadvertently created the very situation he was trying to avoid. This realization adds another layer to his internal struggle, as he grapples with guilt, frustration, and the growing fear that he may lose everything despite his best intentions. As the conflict intensifies, Diane's strategy becomes more aggressive, pushing her into territory where the consequences are no longer easily controlled. Her need to protect her position evolves into a willingness to expose, manipulate, and even destroy if necessary, because in her mind, survival justifies escalation. She begins to set subtle traps, to create situations that force reactions, to test the boundaries of trust in ways that reveal more than words ever could. Each move is calculated to shift the balance of power, to ensure that she is never again caught off guard, and yet, with every step forward, she moves closer to a point of no return. Nikki, unwilling to be positioned as the villain in a narrative she did not create, begins to push back, not with overt aggression, but with a quiet resilience that challenges Diane's assumptions. She refuses to be intimidated, to retreat, or to allow Diane to control the direction of the conflict. And that resistance only fuels Diane's determination. What emerges is a psychological duel where neither side is willing to concede, where every action is both a defense and an attack, and where the true cost of victory becomes increasingly unclear. In the background, the wider world of Genoa City begins to feel the impact of this escalating tension, as alliances shift, perceptions change, and the fallout from personal conflict begins to ripple outward. What started as a fracture in a marriage now threatens to become something far more disruptive, affecting not only the individuals directly involved but also the delicate balance of relationships that define the city itself. The stakes continue to rise, pushing each character closer to decisions that will have lasting consequences, decisions driven not by logic, but by emotion, fear, and the desperate need to maintain control. And as everything builds toward an inevitable breaking point, the question is no longer whether the truth will come out, but how much damage will be done when it does, and whether any of them will be able to walk away from the wreckage of their choices with anything left intact.